December 4th, 2024, Midtown Manhattan. A 26-year-old walks into a Starbucks. Mask on, hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder. He orders a coffee, sits down, waits. Outside, Brian Thompson is walking to the Hilton Hotel for an investor meeting. He's the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, one of the most powerful companies in America. 50 years old, married, father of two. He's done this 100 times. Just another morning meeting in Midtown. He has no idea he's being watched. 3 shots, 1 to the back, 2 to the leg. Thompson collapses on the sidewalk. The shooter doesn't run. He walks, gets on a bicycle, disappears into the city like he was never there. No robbery, no argument, no confrontation, just execution. And within hours of the news breaking, the internet did something nobody predicted. They started calling the shooter a hero. That's the story we're going to get into today. Because this case is unlike anything I've ever covered. It's not just a murder case, it's a mirror held up to the entire American system. And what it reflects is deeply uncomfortable. Let's start at the beginning. The NYPD launched one of the biggest manhunts in recent memory, and they had almost nothing. The shooter wore a mask, gloves. The gun had a suppressor, 3D printed, completely untraceable. He was good, careful. This wasn't impulsive. Every detail had been thought through, but the shell casings at the scene gave investigators pause. 3 words scratched into the brass: delay, deny, depose. Those aren't random words. Anyone who has ever fought with a health insurance company knows exactly what they mean. Delay the claim, deny coverage, depose the doctors who push back. It's the business model, dressed up in corporate language. But underneath, that's what it is. The shooter wasn't just leaving evidence, he was leaving a statement. UnitedHealthcare is the largest health insurance company in America. 49 million Americans are covered under their policies. And in 2023 alone, they denied 32% of all insurance claims submitted to them. 1 in 3 sick Americans told, sorry, we're not paying for that. Brian Thompson, the man now lying on a Manhattan sidewalk, made $10.2 million that year running the company that sent those denial letters. For 6 days after the shooting, the shooter was gone. No leads, no name, no face. Just a grainy figure on CCTV footage, calm and unhurried, cycling away from a crime scene like he had somewhere better to be. Then a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania changed everything. A customer recognized him from the news coverage, called the police, and within minutes, officers had him surrounded. His name was Luigi Mangione, 26 years old, engineering graduate from the University of Pennsylvania, valedictorian of his high school class, 0 criminal record, not a single flag in his history, the perfect suspect for the wrong crime. Or at least, that's how it looked at first. Luigi Nicholas Mangione grew up in Maryland, wealthy family, private schools, Ivy League education. His grandfather founded a successful real estate company. His mother was a philanthropist. His cousin serves in the state legislature. This was not a man who slipped through the cracks. This was a man with every door open to him, and he walked through most of them. At Penn, he studied computer science and engineering. Graduated in 2020, took a job at TrueCar, a car buying platform, then moved to Hawaii to work remotely, surfed, read. Spent his days in what looked, from the outside, like an enviable life. But something was coming apart. Investigators went through his reading history. The Unabomber Manifesto by Ted Kaczynski. Industrial Society and Its Future. Books on chronic back pain. Books on the failures of the American healthcare system. He had spondylolisthesis, a serious spinal condition, where the vertebrae slip out of position. He'd undergone surgery in 2023, and according to people who knew him, the experience with the healthcare system had been, to put it mildly, radicalizing. Insurance delays, wrong diagnoses, months of pain that nobody seemed to take seriously. A system that, in his view, treated him as a number rather than a person. Friends described a man who had grown increasingly obsessed, increasingly angry, increasingly convinced that what was wrong with America had a specific, identifiable cause, and that cause had a face. When police arrested him, here's what was in the backpack. A 3D printed 9mm pistol, a silencer, $10,000 in cash, a fake ID, and a notebook. 3 pages of handwritten notes. One passage in particular became the most quoted text of the entire case. He wrote that he had targeted insurance because, and I'm quoting directly, it checks every box. He wrote that these people are the most insulated from the consequences of their actions. And he wrote, they are not expecting it. He planned this, studied the target, studied the building, studied the routines, and then he waited for the right moment. This was not a man who snapped. This was a man who decided. Here's where the case becomes genuinely unlike anything I've seen before in true crime. Within hours of the shooting, not outrage, celebration. Free Luigi. He did what needed to be done. The first hero of 2024. TikTok videos defending Mangione racked up millions of views in a matter of hours. A subreddit dedicated to him hit 50,000 members in 48 hours. People started donating to his legal fund, wearing Free Luigi t-shirts, printing his face on merchandise. A GoFundMe for his defense raised over $500,000. And it wasn't just anonymous internet users. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse in New York, chanting his name. His high school classmates gave interviews defending his character. Several politicians, sitting members of Congress, made public statements acknowledging that his actions, whatever their legality, pointed to something real and broken in the American healthcare system. To be clear, they weren't endorsing murder. Nobody serious was. But they were asking a question that made a lot of people deeply uncomfortable. If the system is broken and nobody with power fixes it, and ordinary people exhaust every legal option available to them and still get nowhere, what happens when someone finally decides that words aren't enough? What happens is Luigi Mangione. And that's what scared people. Not the shooting itself, though that was terrifying enough. What scared people was the reaction to it, because it revealed how much anger had been sitting beneath the surface, waiting for something to attach itself to. A CEO from a different insurance company went on record shortly after the arrest. He said, and this is a direct quote, "We are all afraid now. We have security details. Our families are scared." For the first time in modern American history, corporate executives were genuinely looking over their shoulders. Not because of a new regulation, not because of a congressional hearing, because one 26-year-old with a 3D printed gun and a notebook had made them afraid. Think about what that means. Every protest, every lawsuit, every documentary, every congressional testimony about the failures of the American healthcare system, none of it moved the needle the way 3 bullets did. That's the uncomfortable truth at the center of this case, and it's why people can't stop talking about it. Now let's talk about where this goes legally, because the legal situation is genuinely complicated. Mangione faces charges on 2 separate fronts. At the federal level, murder through the use of a firearm. If convicted, he faces life in prison, potentially the death penalty, depending on how aggressively prosecutors pursue that avenue. At the state level in New York, second-degree murder, criminal possession of a weapon, and forgery charges related to the fake IDs. His defense team has been careful. They haven't officially tipped their hand on strategy. But legal observers have been speculating since the day of his arrest, and a few theories keep coming up. The first is mental health. The argument would be that Mangione was not in a rational state of mind, that the combination of chronic pain, surgical trauma, and obsessive research into healthcare failures produced a psychological break that should be considered in determining criminal responsibility. The problem with this argument is the notebook. 3 pages of detailed, lucid, strategic planning don't read like someone in crisis. They read like someone who made a decision. The second theory is a political framing, comparing him to historical figures who committed violence in service of an ideological goal. Kaczynski, Hinckley, people whose cases forced courts and society to grapple with the line between crime and statement. It's a risky strategy, but it plays into the broader cultural moment around this case. The third, and this is the one that prosecutors are most worried about, is jury nullification. Jury nullification is when a jury decides to acquit a defendant despite overwhelming evidence of guilt, because they believe the law itself is unjust, or the circumstances justify the action. It's rare, but it happens. And here's the problem for the prosecution. In a country where 68% of people say they distrust the health insurance industry, where millions of Americans have personally experienced claim denials, coverage gaps, and the bureaucratic nightmare of fighting for treatment they were promised, finding 12 jurors who will convict without hesitation is not as straightforward as it sounds. Legal experts are genuinely split on this. Some say the evidence is so overwhelming, ballistics, fingerprints, DNA, the notebook, the fake IDs, the cash, that no jury could justify acquittal. Others say, wait until you see who's actually sitting in those seats. Wait until the defense starts asking potential jurors about their own healthcare experiences. The trial is scheduled for later this year, and when it happens, it will be one of the most watched legal proceedings in recent American history. Brian Thompson left behind a wife and 2 children. I want to be clear about that before we reach any kind of conclusion, because it's easy in cases like this, where the systemic issues are so large and the public anger is so visible, to let the victim become almost abstract, a symbol of something rather than a person. He was a person. He was a father. He was someone's husband. And he died on a Manhattan sidewalk on an ordinary Wednesday morning, walking to a meeting he'd probably attended versions of 100 times before. Whatever you think of the company he ran, whatever you think of the industry he represented, he did not deserve what happened to him. And Luigi Mangione, a young man with every advantage, every door open, a family that loved him, and a future that should have been straightforward, threw all of it away for 3 bullets and a point he needed to make. But here's what I find impossible to stop thinking about. In the weeks after the shooting, UnitedHealthcare's stock dropped 5%. Other major insurers quietly began reviewing their claims policies. Healthcare executives who hadn't spoken publicly about reform in years suddenly started giving interviews about the need for change in the industry. Not because of protests, not because of an election result, not because of legislation, because they were scared. And that raises a question that I don't think has a clean answer, one that this case will be forcing people to sit with for a very long time. Is Luigi Mangione a murderer who deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison? Yes, almost certainly, by the letter of the law. But is he also something else? Something that the existing vocabulary doesn't quite cover? A symptom of something that was already there, that this case simply made visible? I don't know how to answer that. And I think anyone who says they do is probably not taking it seriously enough. The trial is coming, and whatever verdict comes out of that courtroom, whatever sentence is handed down, whatever arguments are made and rejected, this case will be studied for decades. Not just for what Luigi Mangione did on a sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan, but for what the reaction to it revealed about the country he did it in, and about how much anger had been sitting there, quiet and patient, waiting for something to finally make it visible.